Time for business now here on France 24. Owen is in his chair, and we're also joined as well by Dr. Caroline Weerts from the Cass Business School in London. Thanks very much for coming in. We'll talk to you in just a moment, Caroline. She's going to be talking, in fact, about Twitter's growing influence at the movie box office. But Owen, first of all, a few market numbers to get through first.
Yeah, pretty choppy days trading so far, Stuart, certainly on the Asian markets. The Nikkei is closed for the next couple of days for a public holiday, so volumes are going to be a little bit thinner than usual. Those are the numbers for you there. You can see the Shanghai Composite and the Hong Kong just in the doldrums a little bit, around 0.5% off. Just while we're talking markets, Société Générale, the French bank's first quarter earnings dropped just a short while ago, at 7% down on earnings for the first quarter. But SocGen noting that its core Tier 1 capital, that's its reserve requirements that are now the subject of intense negotiations in Brussels, up to 9%. That's without a capital increase. Remember, all these French banks have been unwinding their positions on EU sovereign debt, or European sovereign debt, I should say, over the last 6 months or so.
OK, well, they say elections, of course, are won and lost on the economy, and that really was the battleground for the duel between Nicolas Sarkozy and François Hollande. Their live TV debate dominated by how best to get France growing without breaking strict new budget rules. Shirley Sitbon followed it.
If François Hollande wins the presidential election, European leaders could head straight to Brussels to renegotiate their fiscal treaty. That's what the socialist candidate told Nicolas Sarkozy during their 3-hour debate. According to Hollande, austerity has failed to save Europe. He says now Europe needs to stimulate growth.
Things are changing in Europe. It's a bit more complicated in Germany, but they're changing position as well. They're moving on the European Central Bank and Eurobonds. There's a new state of mind.
Sarkozy said there's no use renegotiating the treaty. He believes that austerity is necessary to reduce deficits, and that making companies more competitive is the key to growth.
It's not enough to go to Europe and ask for change. There are 27 countries involved. The economic crisis is a global one. You think it's easy? We've avoided a catastrophe in Greece.
Sarkozy criticized Hollande's plan to hire tens of thousands of civil servants, mainly teachers, saying this would worsen France's debt. Hollande answered Sarkozy's economic results are so disappointing, the incumbent president has no lessons to give.
The public debt is due to the tax breaks that you gave the rich and to your inability to control public spending.
Hollande criticized the soaring unemployment during Sarkozy's mandate. It's now at 10%. The incumbent president replied most other European countries had worse results.
OK, let's stay in the Eurozone as we pick up on one or two more of the day's business headlines for you now. Starting with the European Central Bank, which is meeting in Spain this Thursday amid exceptional security. Police have beefed up their presence in Barcelona as the ECB takes its monthly get-together out of Frankfurt. The ECB is under pressure to help flagging economies like Spain by lowering interest rates, but is expected to resist any changes.
And Nokia will face shareholders over its disastrous recent performance at the company's annual meeting later this Thursday. The Finnish mobile phone maker lost 1.3 billion euros in the first quarter before its credit rating was downgraded to junk, and its return to US markets with the Lumia 900 was blighted by a network glitch. On Wednesday, Nokia waded into the patent wars by filing lawsuits against HTC and BlackBerry maker RAM.
Now, if you follow the movies, you know there's a big summer ahead, lots of blockbusters out. The Avengers movie is just out. I think it's out in the US this weekend. We've got the latest or the final in the newish Batman trilogy out this summer. It's been a tricky year, though, for some blockbusters. We've seen a fair few flops. And it appears that social networking is now starting to dictate the pace a little bit at the box office when it comes to returns. Caroline, you've been doing studies on this for some time now about the relationship between social networking and what social networking, particularly sites like Facebook and Twitter, can do for the opening weekend of big movies. Tell us a little bit more about the sort of numbers you've been looking at.
Yeah, well, we actually took a view over 105 big US movies over a full year. Over 4 million tweets were analyzed just for this 3-day period. And we find indeed that there is a systematic impact of what people say about the movie on Friday on the rest of the weekend. So the box office takings can really be impacted by that quite significantly.
And there's evidence as well, isn't there, to kind of suggest that the relationship between positive and negative ratios from Twitter and box office performance, that affects it a lot as well.
Yes, exactly. So it's not just the volume. So we do know that, of course, the more people talk about a movie before it's released, the more people will go and see it in the weekend. But the interesting thing is that really, once they have been to see it and they write an evaluation, so if you look at the ratio of positive to negative tweets, the better that is, basically, the better the movie will perform eventually. We actually had a look at, for example, one movie that didn't do very well in our sample was Nightmare on Elm Street, a horror shocker by Warner Brothers, and they actually just had a ratio of 3. And then if you take that in comparison to, for example, How to Train Your Dragon, they had a ratio of 40. So you see there's a huge difference even within movies.
And just as we've got some pictures of the Avengers there running, Caroline, there's been some very positive buzz about that so far. We've yet to see the box office numbers. I think there's something like a 10-to-1 positive to negative ratio. But essentially then, what we're saying is that in the good old days, if you like, probably when Stuart and I were growing up, probably Stuart was watching the first Nightmare on Elm Street, you could go to the cinema, you had word of mouth, you had newspaper reviews. You could probably guarantee, or the studios could guarantee, maybe around a week by the time word started to filter out if it was a real turkey. Now we're talking about not even 24 hours. We're talking about a major impact, and that the studios can't really guarantee a weekend at the box office, maybe just one night.
Exactly. So they can still guarantee the opening night by having just enough hype about the release of a movie. But then basically we know from our data that the height of tweeting really happens on Friday night at 10:30 p.m. when people leave the movie theater and just tweet about their impressions of the movie. And this does have an impact on what happens on the next day. So for example, we ran some simulations. So if A Nightmare on Elm Street had done as well, had been perceived as well as How to Train Your Dragon, they would have made about $4 million more on Saturday and Sunday than they actually did. So this can have an impact of up to 20%.
So do you think that studios are going to have to change the way they do things? I mean, change the way they market things, change the way they try and publicise this, because they're going to have to be very aware, aren't they, that Twitter's having this impact?
Yeah, I think they are aware that Twitter is having this impact, but the problem is that you don't really have a quick fix for this one. So just having more marketing is not going to change the problem, because this is really about the quality of the movie. So what they really have to do is make better movies, whatever better means for a particular audience. But if the audience doesn't like it, it's not going to work anymore. They will notice this.
Just make better movies, but
I know.
And I think one of the movies you looked at, Caroline, was John Carter. We talked about this. Massive budget, massive hype, and it bombed. It cost, what,
Exactly.
$250 million or something to make?
Yes, it did. It cost $250 million to make. It was a huge flop. It only made $39 million or something like that over the opening weekend. And that basically means that it's not going to perform well for the rest of its run either. So this opening weekend is really very crucial for the big Hollywood blockbusters.
is this good for filmgoers, do you think? I mean, obviously they now can immediately see what other people are saying, but sometimes there is a bit of a kind of, build-up and people say something's terrible, and actually you go and see it and think, actually, I quite enjoyed that.
That is true, but I think the interesting thing about Twitter is that you do choose who you follow on Twitter, right? So these are people whose opinion you value, you would assume. And this makes it quite different from just all these normal websites like IMDb where you read reviews, because there you really have no idea who's talking about the movie. But Twitter really gives you much more of a control over who you listen to. So I do think it's good for moviegoers. They can make better decisions, and I also hope it will be good in the long run, because I do think that studios will possibly have to cut down a little bit on these franchises that we have been seeing. So Pirates of the Caribbean 15 or something. I do hope that we'll see a little bit less of that in the future.
What about independent movies, Caroline? Just briefly, it perhaps doesn't work quite the same, simply because they don't have the same budgets, they perhaps don't have the same reach. Can we apply this model to the kind of independent productions?
I think our research is not about independent movies, and simply they have a different release model. So independent movies usually just start in a smaller number of screens, and then depending on how well they do, they'll be shown for a certain amount of time and in more screens. So they really have this traditional model, which kind of has been a bit lost in this blockbuster world where everything is just about this big first weekend. So I think that if anything, smaller movies will benefit from this, because it's about the quality and not anymore just about huge marketing spend and advertising campaigns.
Caroline, thank you very much. Caroline Witz from the Cass Business School in London. Thanks very much for coming in and explaining that to us. Thanks to Owen as well. I'm still amazed that she's been examining 4 million tweets. Can you imagine that? That's all from us. More news coming up very shortly. Lorna will be here after the break.